Homeless black man saves Hell's Angel from disgrace. Next day, 300 bikers rebuild his house. The cold wind whipped through the cracked streets of Detroit that night, carrying the scent of oil, smoke, and forgotten dreams. Under the flickering light of a broken street lamp sat a man wrapped in a tattered brown blanket. His name was Marcus Hayes, a homeless man whose life had once been filled with music, laughter, and purpose. Years ago, he had worked as a mechanic, the kind of man who could fix anything with an engine. But after losing his wife and daughter in a drunk driving accident, Marcus had fallen into a darkness he couldn't escape. The house he'd built with his own hands was gone, sold to pay hospital bills. Now all he had left was a small cardboard sign that read, "Anything helps. God bless." That night, the city was louder than usual. The roar of motorcycle engines broke through the silence. A group of bikers sped down the street, black leather, roaring chrome, and the unmistakable insignia of the Hells Angels gleaming under the dim light. People avoided their path, fearful of the notorious reputation that followed the gang. But Marcus didn't move. He just watched as the leader of the group, a tall man with a beard and piercing blue eyes named Jake Hammer Morrison, parked his bike near a bar. Jake was a man built from war and rebellion. A former soldier turned biker, he carried the weight of his past in every scar. Tonight, he was furious. Inside the bar, he'd been accused of theft by one of his own brothers, a lie that could destroy his name and his standing in the club. The Hells Angels valued honor above all, and a single stain on it could mean exile or worse. When Jake stormed out of the bar, rage clouding his judgment, he didn't notice the man watching from across the street. Moments later, trouble arrived. A group of rival bikers, men from a gang known as the Iron Wolves, cornered Jake in the alley, eager to finish what the accusations had started. They wanted to humiliate him, to record him begging for mercy and post it online to ruin his reputation forever. Jake fought back, but there were 5 of them. He swung hard, but one blow to the ribs sent him sprawling to the ground. The wolves laughed and raised a chain, ready to strike the final blow. That's when Marcus moved. Without thinking, he lunged forward, shouting for them to stop. His voice cracked through the night like thunder. The bikers turned, surprised to see a ragged homeless man standing there, holding a rusted metal pipe he'd found near the trash bins. They laughed at first, mocking him, but Marcus didn't back down. "You wanna fight someone?" he yelled. "Fight me." The fight that followed was chaos. Marcus swung wildly, managing to hit one of the wolves in the leg. Jake, stunned by the stranger's courage, found his strength again and grabbed his fallen chain. Together, they fought side by side until the wolves finally fled, cursing as they disappeared into the darkness. When it was over, Marcus collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. Jake knelt beside him, bruised and bleeding, but alive. "Why'd you do that, man?" Jake asked, voice trembling. Marcus smiled weakly. "Because no one deserves to be beaten down for something they didn't do. I've been there." Jake didn't know what to say. In all his years leading tough men, no one had ever risked their life for him, especially not a stranger with nothing to lose. He helped Marcus to his feet and took him inside the bar. The crowd fell silent as Jake explained what had happened. Some didn't believe him until they saw the bruises, the blood, and the security footage from the alley that one of the bikers had captured on a phone. Marcus had saved him. The man everyone ignored on the street had done what none of his brothers had. That night, Jake made a promise. "You helped me keep my honor," he said. "Now I'll help you get yours back." The next morning, the roar of motorcycles echoed through the city again. But this time, it wasn't for chaos. It was for Marcus. 300 Hells Angels, from across states, rolled into the broken neighborhood where Marcus slept. Neighbors peeked out of their windows in disbelief as the bikers began unloading lumber, cement, and tools from their trucks. Jake stood in front of Marcus, grinning. "You said you lost your home," he said. "Well, brother, we're gonna build you a new one." Marcus couldn't believe it. For years, he had been invisible, a shadow no one cared to notice. Now, dozens of men were working side by side, building walls, painting, and planting flowers around what would soon become a small but beautiful house. They worked through the day, their laughter filling the air. Some of the bikers even played music on their radios, turning the construction into a celebration. By evening, when the sun dipped below the horizon, the new home stood proudly, modest but strong, a symbol of what humanity could do when kindness led the way. Tears rolled down Marcus's face as Jake handed him a set of keys. "You saved my name," Jake said. "Now we're giving you yours back." Word of what happened spread across social media like wildfire. News outlets called it the Brotherhood miracle. Strangers began sending donations to help other homeless veterans. But for Marcus, the greatest gift wasn't the house, it was the feeling of being seen again, of being part of something bigger. Weeks later, Marcus started volunteering at a shelter, helping other homeless people fix old bicycles and motorcycles. Jake visited often, sometimes with the whole gang, bringing supplies and food. Their bond had become something rare, built not from blood or duty, but from mutual respect and the unspoken truth that heroes can come from anywhere. One night, as Marcus sat on the porch of his new home, he looked up at the stars and whispered, "Thank you, Lisa, thank you, baby girl." He could almost hear his daughter's laughter in the wind. He finally felt peace. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a homeless man or a biker gang. It was about redemption, about how a single act of courage can change two lives, and perhaps an entire community. It reminded everyone watching that kindness costs nothing, yet it can rebuild everything that's been lost. And as the engines of 300 bikers thundered one last time before fading into the distance, the city knew that something extraordinary had happened, a story of brotherhood, sacrifice, and the power of one man's courage to light up even the darkest streets. The morning after the bikers rebuilt Marcus's house, the street that had once been forgotten by the city felt alive for the first time in years. Neighbors who had never spoken to each other gathered around the small home at the corner of Jefferson Street, taking pictures, shaking hands, and offering smiles that hadn't been seen there in decades. Kids pointed in awe at the line of shining motorcycles, their chrome reflecting the sunrise. It wasn't just a new home that stood there, it was a symbol of something the neighborhood had lost long ago, hope. Marcus stood by the front door, barefoot on the fresh wooden porch, still half in disbelief that any of it was real. For so many years he'd slept under broken roofs, bridges, and benches, waking up to the sound of sirens or the cold touch of rain. Now, when he turned the key Jake had given him, he stepped into a warm space that smelled of pinewood and fresh paint. On the table inside sat a leather jacket with the Hells Angels insignia stitched on the back, and a handwritten note on top. "You don't need to ride to be one of us. You've already proven what brotherhood means, Jake." Marcus ran his fingers over the note, his chest tightening with emotion. No one had called him brother in years. For a man who'd lost everything, that single word meant more than gold. But as he stood there, tears welling up in his eyes, a knock came at the door. It was Jake, with a small group of bikers behind him, Axel, Bear, and Rico, men with faces hardened by life but hearts as loyal as steel. They came carrying boxes of supplies, food, clothes, tools, and even an old radio. "You didn't think we'd just build it and leave, did you?" Jake said with a grin. "This is just the start." Over the next few days, Marcus's house became a kind of sanctuary. The bikers helped repair neighboring homes, fixed fences, and cleaned up the street. For the first time in years, the residents saw bikers not as outlaws, but as men of action. And Marcus, once just another shadow in the alley, became the heart of it all. But as word spread, not everyone was happy. The Iron Wolves, the rival gang that had tried to humiliate Jake, saw the news stories and the viral videos online. Their leader, Vince, Viper, Daniels, took it as a personal insult. The Wolves had been losing influence for months, And now this act of unity had made Jake and his crew into heroes. Viper decided it was time to remind everyone who controlled the streets. One night, Marcus heard the sound of motorcycles again, but this time, it wasn't friendly. The rumble was different, heavier, more menacing. He stepped outside and saw flames in the distance. One of the wolves had set fire to a nearby abandoned car. Moments later, a rock shattered his window. On it, a note, "Stay out of club business. This ain't over." When Jake arrived minutes later, Marcus was standing calmly with a fire extinguisher, putting out the last of the flames. "They think they can scare me," Marcus said quietly. "But I've already lost everything once. I'm not losing this." Jake clenched his fists. "They crossed the line. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about everyone we've helped." The next few days were tense. Marcus could feel the unease in the neighborhood. The wolves started causing trouble, slashing tires, threatening people who spoke to the angels, and vandalizing the shelter where Marcus volunteered. But instead of backing down, Marcus proposed something unexpected. "Let's not fight fire with fire," he told Jake. "Let's show them we're not what they think we are." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about peace with men who live for chaos." "Yeah," Marcus said, "but even wolves get hungry for something real. Maybe we can feed that instead of their hate." It took courage, and a bit of madness, but Marcus decided to meet Viper face to face. Jake didn't like it, but he trusted him. They rode out together to an old factory on the edge of town, where the wolves gathered under the dim glow of flickering lights. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Viper stepped forward, tattoos crawling up his neck like shadows. "You got guts showing your face here, old man," he sneered. "What? You think you can preach us into being good guys?" Marcus didn't flinch. "No," he said. "I just came to remind you that hate only keeps you chained. You can burn every house, break every bike, but you'll never own respect. You earn that." For a long moment, silence hung in the air. Then Viper laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You talk like some kind of preacher," he said. "But what's respect worth when all you got is dirt under your nails?" Marcus looked him dead in the eye. "Everything, because it means I still got something you don't, peace." That line hit harder than any punch. Jake and his crew watched as something shifted in the air. The wolves didn't attack. They just watched Marcus walk out into the night, his back straight, unafraid. The next morning, something unbelievable happened. A few members of the wolves showed up at the shelter with bags of food. They didn't say a word, just dropped them off and left. It wasn't surrender, but it was a start. Weeks passed, and the neighborhood began to heal. The bikers, once divided by rivalry, started working together quietly, fixing bikes for kids and repairing roads. Marcus had become the bridge between them, a man who'd shown two worlds that strength didn't come from fear, but from compassion. Then came the day that truly sealed his legacy. One of the news stations decided to air a segment about the homeless hero of Detroit. Marcus was nervous at first, but Jake insisted. "People need to see what one man can do when he doesn't give up," he said. During the interview, Marcus looked straight into the camera. "I used to think I had nothing left," he said softly. "But I learned that even when life takes everything from you, your home, your family, your pride, it can never take your ability to do good. And sometimes, helping someone else rebuild is how you rebuild yourself." That night, Jake and the 300 bikers gathered again, not to fight, but to celebrate. They rode together through the city, their engines thundering like a heartbeat that echoed across every corner. For the first time in a long time, Detroit didn't feel broken, it felt alive. Marcus stood on his porch, watching the lights disappear down the road. He smiled, knowing that the man who once slept in the cold had now sparked a fire in others. His story had become more than just redemption, it had become a movement of unity and compassion. And as he looked at the sky, whispering a quiet prayer of thanks, the wind carried the sound of engines far away, like a promise that brotherhood, once found, never truly ends. Months had passed since the night 300 bikers rebuilt Marcus Hayes' home, but the echo of that miracle still rippled through Detroit. The street that had once been silent now buzzed with life. Children played where gangs once stood, old neighbors smiled again, and even the broken streetlights had been repaired by volunteers who said they were just doing what Marcus would do. But while the world outside grew brighter, inside Marcus's heart a quiet restlessness stirred. The nights were peaceful, yet his mind often drifted to the memories of his wife and daughter, the faces that time could never erase. He would sit by the window, watching the moonlight touch the porch Jake and his brothers had built, and wonder if his second chance in life had a larger purpose than just his own healing. One cold evening, Jake pulled up to Marcus's house, the growl of his Harley breaking the still air. He looked troubled. "Brother," he said, stepping off his bike, "we got a problem." Marcus nodded toward the porch chair. "Sit, tell me." Jake rubbed his jaw. "There's a shelter up north in Flint. It burned down last week. Dozens of vets, families, they lost everything. The city won't help. The system doesn't care." Sound familiar? Marcus felt a lump in his throat. "Yeah, too familiar." Jake leaned forward. "I've been thinking, we could do something. Not just one house, a whole rebuild. A place for people to start over. But I can't do it alone. We need someone who knows what it's like to lose everything, and still stand up again." Marcus sat in silence for a long moment, then smiled. "Then let's build something that lasts." Within a week, the movement began. Jake spread the word through the biker community. Every chapter, every brother, every friend. The message was simple: rebuild hope. The Hells Angels, the Iron Wolves, and even smaller clubs that had once been rivals came together. What started as a single act of gratitude had become a nationwide call to action. By the time the first trucks rolled into Flint, there were nearly 500 bikers, mechanics, carpenters, and volunteers ready to work. Marcus stood before them, no longer in rags, but wearing the leather jacket Jake had given him. He wasn't just the man they'd helped. He was now the heart that guided them. The work was hard. Winter in Michigan was brutal. Snow fell thick and heavy, and the wind bit through their jackets. Some days, supplies didn't arrive. Other days, machinery froze. But no one quit. Marcus led by example. Hammer in hand, face covered in sweat and frost, working from dawn until the last light faded. When the volunteers grew tired, he reminded them of what they were building. "We're not just putting up walls," he'd say. "We're building chances for people who've run out of them." Word spread fast. News cameras came. Donations poured in. Even city officials who once ignored the homeless problem started paying attention. What had begun as one man's redemption had become a movement of compassion and unity. But not everyone supported it. Some local politicians felt threatened, afraid that Marcus's story made them look weak. One evening, a government inspector arrived and shut down the construction site, claiming there were safety violations. The volunteers were furious. Jake nearly lost his temper, but Marcus stopped him. "Let them play the games," Marcus said calmly. "We'll do it the right way. Paperwork, inspections, everything clean. They can't stop us if we stay true." It took weeks of struggle, endless meetings, forms, and bureaucracy, but Marcus's calm leadership turned anger into action. Slowly, people began to notice that he wasn't just a symbol anymore. He was a leader, the kind the city desperately needed. By spring, the shelter stood tall, a massive structure of red brick and steel beams, with wide windows that let sunlight flood in. They called it the Haven. Inside, each room had a plaque on the wall that read, "Built by Brothers." On the day it opened, hundreds gathered for the ceremony. Veterans stood beside bikers, children beside city workers. Marcus stepped to the podium, holding a worn photograph of his wife and daughter. His voice trembled at first, but then it grew strong. "I used to think my story ended when I lost everything," he said. "But that's not how life works. Sometimes, the worst day of your life isn't the end. It's the beginning of something bigger." I thought I was saving one man that night in the alley, but really, it was me who was being saved. Because when you help someone else rise, you rise too. The crowd was silent, tears glinting in more eyes than anyone would admit. Jake placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder, proud beyond words. After the ceremony, a little boy tugged on Marcus's sleeve. He couldn't have been older than 6. "Mister," the boy said softly, "my mom says you're a hero. Is that true?" Marcus knelt down and smiled. "No, son. I just remembered what it feels like to be human." The boy grinned and hugged him. That moment said more than any speech could. As night fell, the bikers lit a massive bonfire near the new shelter. Music played, laughter filled the air, and for the first time, Marcus didn't feel like a man who had lost. He felt like a man who had rebuilt. The firelight danced in his eyes as he looked at Jake, who raised his drink and shouted, "To Marcus Hayes, the man who turned Brotherhood into a revolution." The crowd roared. The sound of engines started one by one, rumbling like thunder. Marcus looked out over the flames, the warmth touching his face, and whispered to himself, "Lisa, baby girl, we did it." From that night on, the movement didn't stop. Across America, biker groups and volunteers started rebuild runs, missions to restore homes and shelters for veterans and the homeless. Each one was inspired by the story of the man who had nothing and gave everything. Years later, when people spoke of Marcus Hayes, they didn't call him homeless anymore. They called him the guardian of the angels, the man who taught a nation that compassion can roar louder than any engine. And when the wind passed through Detroit on quiet nights, it carried with it the echo of motorcycles, not as a sound of fear, but of freedom, unity, and the unforgettable truth that one act of courage can rebuild the world. Years passed, and Marcus Hayes' name had become something of a legend. Not just in Detroit, but across the country. News outlets, documentaries, and community leaders spoke about the haven and the rebuild runs that had grown from it. But Marcus himself never sought fame. He still lived in that same small house on Jefferson Street, still woke before sunrise, brewed his simple coffee, and sat on his porch to watch the light touch the cracked sidewalks he once called home. The world had changed around him. Where there used to be broken glass and graffiti, there were now murals, paintings of bikers, veterans, and families with the words, "From ashes, we rebuild." Every day, people came by to shake his hand, take pictures, or just thank him for giving them hope. But Marcus never saw himself as a hero. He still saw himself as the same man who once stood under that flickering streetlight, scared, cold, but willing to act when it mattered. Jake "Hammer" Morrison remained by his side all these years. He and Marcus had become like brothers, bound not by blood but by loyalty. They had built dozens of shelters, rebuilt entire neighborhoods, and inspired countless others to join their cause. But time had begun to wear on Jake. His beard had gone gray, his hands trembled more when he gripped his motorcycle handles, and the years of hard riding had taken their toll. One evening, Jake visited Marcus after one of the rebuild runs. His voice was quieter than usual. "Doc says it's the lungs," he said with a half smile, hiding the pain. "Too many years breathing exhaust and smoke. He says I should slow down." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "You ever known how to slow down?" Jake chuckled. "Not once." Then his face grew serious. "But listen, brother, when I'm gone, this doesn't end. You started something that belongs to everyone now. Promise me you'll keep it alive." Marcus nodded, his heart heavy. "I promise." A few months later, Jake passed away peacefully in his sleep. His funeral was unlike any the city had ever seen. Thousands of bikers from all over the country came to pay their respects. The streets trembled with the sound of roaring engines. As Marcus stood before the flag-draped coffin, the tears he'd been holding back for days finally fell. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't prepare notes. He didn't need them. His voice was low, but steady. "Jake Morrison was more than a brother to me. He was proof that no man is beyond redemption. We met in a fight neither of us should have survived, and somehow, we built a world out of it. He showed me that strength isn't about the noise you make. It's about the lives you lift. Rest easy, brother. We'll keep riding. The crowd fell silent, then the engines started one by one, thousands of them rumbling like thunder in tribute. It was the kind of farewell Jake would have loved. After Jake's passing, Marcus threw himself into the mission harder than ever. He expanded the Haven program into other states, working with churches, biker clubs, and volunteers. He created a foundation called Hammer's Hands, dedicated to helping homeless veterans learn trade skills and rebuild their lives. For every man or woman they helped, Marcus would hand them a small silver coin engraved with Jake's initials, a token of brotherhood, a reminder to keep giving. But Marcus's own health began to fade too. The years of hardship, sleepless nights, and physical labor caught up with him. His hair turned white, his hands arthritic, yet he refused to stop. The day I quit helping, he used to say, is the day I go back to being lost. One cold autumn morning, as leaves fell like gold over the rebuilt neighborhood, Marcus was found sitting on his porch, peaceful, smiling, his hand resting on that same photo of his wife and daughter. The cup of coffee beside him had gone cold. He was gone, just as quietly as he had lived. The news spread across the nation. For days, motorcycle engines could be heard roaring in cities and small towns. Tributes to the man who had once had nothing but gave the world everything. At his funeral, held beside the Haven, hundreds of bikers stood shoulder to shoulder with veterans, children, and families whose lives he touched. On the stage stood a young woman named Ava, one of the first people Marcus had helped years ago when she was homeless with her son. She now ran one of the shelters he'd built. With tears in her eyes, she spoke to the crowd. Marcus Hayes didn't just rebuild houses, she said softly. He rebuilt people. He rebuilt faith. He rebuilt humanity in places where it was forgotten. And he never asked for anything in return. He taught us that heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes, they wear leather jackets and carry scars. Behind her stood a banner showing Marcus's face beside Jake's. Two men from opposite worlds, united by one act of courage. Below their images were the words Marcus once said on live TV, helping someone else rebuild is how you rebuild yourself. When the speeches ended, the bikers started their engines. The roar shook the sky. They rode in formation down Jefferson Street, 300 of them, just like the day they built his first home. The sound was deafening, powerful, and beautiful. People lined the sidewalks, waving flags, holding candles, crying and cheering all at once. As the procession passed Marcus's small house, someone noticed something that made everyone stop. On the porch railing hung Jake's old leather jacket, perfectly draped, moving gently in the wind, as if Marcus had left it there, waiting for his brother. No one touched it. No one said a word. The engines went quiet, and in that silence, it felt like Marcus and Jake were both still there, watching over the city they had changed forever. Years later, the legacy continued. The Haven shelters multiplied across America. Each one had a plaque at the entrance with the words, "In memory of Marcus Hayes and Jake Morrison, proof that brotherhood can rebuild the world." And sometimes, late at night, when the wind blew through Detroit, people swore they could still hear the faint hum of motorcycle engines in the distance, two riders, side by side, forever on the road, reminding the world that compassion is the loudest sound a man can leave behind. The years rolled on, and the legacy of Marcus Hayes became something greater than any monument could hold. His story was taught in schools, shared in churches, and whispered around campfires by bikers who carried his name like a badge of honor. The streets he once wandered hungry and forgotten were now lined with murals, each one painted with his calm face beside the words he had lived by, "Kindness is strength."